as you know, but we're going to do an introduction again to this. Since 2007, municipalities in Ontario have the ability, they don't have to, with the exception of Toronto, to appoint accountability officers, and there are 4 of them: the Integrity Commissioner, the Auditor General, the Lobbyist Registrar, and the Ombudsman. Just the Ombudsman is an internal municipal level ombudsman. It's not the closed meeting investigator who can be the provincial ombudsman. All 4 are mandatory for Toronto. They are required to have them, but they're optional for the 443 other municipalities in Ontario. And here's a little chart. There are approximately 30 integrity commissioners, including Hamilton. That number changed a little. Some of the smaller places have switched back and forth from having one to not having one. That's a close number. There are 6 auditor generals, including Hamilton. There's 1 lobbyist registrar, that's Ottawa's, and there are no ombudsmen at the current time. So Hamilton has 2 of the 3 of them.
Just so I'm clear on that, Lisa. So you're saying out of 443 municipalities, only 1 has a lobbyist registry?
That's correct, other than Toronto,
Other than
that
Toronto,
has
which
it
is
is required.
Okay. Yeah, the show. What do they like on the right hand corner? We're here.
No, I have to go back to the slideshow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's actually easier to do it. Maybe if you just press the clicker.
Okay, thank you. There's nothing inherently wrong about logging. It's part of how government works and what happens all the time. What a lobbyist registry is about transparency, to know who's logging and what the subject matter is. The responsibility in a registry system is on the lobbyist to self-identify, and lobbying in its most general sense means communicating about a subject matter to advance an interest. Lobbyists can be independent, they can be in-house, and they can be paid or unpaid. The registry is public, it's open for everyone to see, and that's obviously the transparency part of it. Anyone can file a complaint with the lobbyist registrar about the requirements for a registry not being met, and it's the lobbyist registrar who investigates and may impose sanctions. A lobbyist who fails to register can be prohibited from lobbying. So exemptions and exclusions, and these are in the very general, high-level sense, and we'll get more into the specifics of it when we go through the draft and the decision points. Lobbying does not include matters of public record, delegations, requests for information in the normal course of an approved process, or processing an application, bid submissions, or participating in consultations. So it doesn't apply to things that are already public, already controlled by procedures. Individuals who are not lobbyists include persons acting on behalf of government, public sector, or other statutory bodies or on behalf of First Nations. So they are not lobbying when they're dealing with the government that has the lobbyist registry. So generally speaking, the process to implement follows this, includes these steps: enacting a bylaw, deciding on options to determine the content of the draft bylaw, establishing a registry, which means you need software to do it, and timelines and the cost to build it, and then the maintenance of that registry, staff resources appropriate to maintain the registry, policy and interpretation issues. You have to identify staff resources for policy and interpretation issues, and education and training for council and staff, those who are impacted by the establishment of a lobbyist registry, and ensure that you have the appropriate training to who needs it. And you need to appoint a lobbyist registrar, identify what the desired competencies are, the tenure, the resources required. And slide form touching on some of the most important pieces of it where there are decisions to be made. In some of them, there's an entire spectrum of options available. There's not just one, two, or three. In a couple of them, for example, for the sanctions, there's just one, two, or three choices to be made. But in terms of the definitions, there's a whole scope, and it's possible to be on the side or the other, or anywhere in between. So the first one being lobby means to communicate with a public office holder on a subject matter to advance a bylaw, policy, program, purchase of goods or services, or grant. One example of limiting the scope of this is to advance a business or financial interest. Another example on the other end of the spectrum is to expand the scope to include advancing other interests, grassroots campaigns in which the public attempts to lobby a politician. And when I chose giving the options here, really I'm drawing on Ottawa and Toronto for where they went. That doesn't mean Hamilton has to follow that exactly, but it gives you an idea of the range and what's already out there. So the first one being Ottawa's and the second being Toronto's. Public office holder means member of council, their staff, and may include other city employees. It could include citizen members of committees, local boards. It could include individuals including providing professional service to the city while they're doing that. So again, there's a spectrum. Senior public office holder, that term is used to identify who receives notice when a lobbyist is prohibited from lobbying, and also when a senior public office holder becomes a lobbyist, there may be a requirement that they have to identify that. And there may even be a restriction on them lobbying for a certain period of time. You're probably familiar with that from provincial and federal levels. So it can be limited, for example, to council and their staff, or it can be expanded to include senior management team, even down to directors and managers. Lobbying exemptions. So as already explained, lobbying never includes matters of public record, delegations, requests for information. Things are done in the normal course within existing procedures. There are options for exemptions, and there's a wide range of them. You can exempt public interest advocacy, not-for-profit entities. You can exempt advocacy on a matter where the primary focus is a broad community benefit or detriment, and where there's no direct, indirect, or perceived benefit to the organization that is doing lobbying. You can exempt even a financial interest if it's not-for-profit, and the Ottawa example is they do have that exemption where there's no paid staff for the not-for-profit. You can exempt constituents, and it would be citywide in relation to the mayor and board and limited to the council.
Are we supposed to ask questions now, Ben, Mr. Chair, or I just wanted to ask a question on the last line.
Sure, start.
Go ahead.
Just for clarification, so if we're getting lobbied by a seniors group that basically thinks up the mountain for a new or an expansion of the senior center, yeah, some will be my constituents, but obviously some will be constituents of other wards. This would imply then that I wouldn't be able to talk to those constituents, or they wouldn't be exempted to talk to me about this issue. Is that correct?
If that were the only limitation on the definition, just the constituent one without the public interest
Yeah.
and those, yes, that would be.
Okay.
Lobbyist exemptions, so again, I was already generally explained, they're not persons acting on behalf of other governments, public sector, or other statutory bodies, or on behalf of First Nations. You can expand the exemption, and Toronto does this quite extensively, to labor and employee groups, and crime corporations and other agencies. Then you have to decide how it actually runs. So there's really two parts to this. There's the registration by the lobbyist, so identifying themselves, the contact information, if you choose to do so, whether they're a former senior public officer, and then the other information is required, such as the subject matter, who they're lobbying for, on what issues. And then there's the returns to report the actual lobbying. So they're required to file a return indicating what lobbying they did, and whose behalf they did it, the date of the communications, and whatever else is required. The Ottawa model is the lobbyist files a return following the lobbying, and it's the public office holder who has to check that that has been, appears on the registry and will report it. It has it to the lobbyist register. The Toronto model is the lobbyist files in advance a lobbying plan, and then as they fulfill each step along the lobbying plan, it's the lobbyist registrar who then checks what's the plans against what's been filed afterwards. There is provision, specific provision in the Municipal Act allowing for a lobbyist code of conduct, which provides guidance to lobbyists of their conduct, including acting with honesty and integrity. It's not necessary to include this. You can rely on the specific requirements of the lobbyist registry as your standards for them. If it is included, there should be certainty that it's enforceable. It's not just something that would be nice if they did. Go to that extent. And it really should be limited to the relationship between lobbyists and public office holders, which is what a lobbyist registry is about. In terms of enforcement, these are the sanctions available when the lobbyist doesn't comply. There are prohibitions on lobbying that can be imposed by a lobbyist registrar, and that includes ending lobbying for a certain period of time. And the other option, which is they're not mutually exclusive, is to create offenses under the Provincial Offences Act. Ottawa has gone with just the first, and Toronto has both, actually, to some extent. Not, they're a little different, but in general terms. And here's reproduced from the report, just a chart on the next steps and timing of seeing this through to General Issues Committee, having public consultation through to enactment of bylaw and recruitment of lobbyist registrar.
This week, can you that presentation, Jerry? Can I have Judy on the list too?
Yeah, that's fine. I just put my name.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we go back to, we should go back to, I guess it would be the fourth slide. Just kind of move forward from there. I've just got a couple of questions on each one of them. Key concepts. Oh, you're going backwards.
I don't know if I can do this fast.
Just page up.
Key concepts. Oh, okay, there you go. And so my question is, with regards to the bullet that says the registry is public, how do we do that? Is that public as in electronically, the public can access it any time? Could you just give me a broader picture of that, please?
Rose?
Yes, sure, through you. We actually have a demonstration of what the office site looks like, so we give you that flavor of what it is, but essentially it is a web application that a citizen can go online and actually do searches right from the web. So we can do that demonstration for you this point if you want to actually see it.
Can you do it up on screen?
Yeah, yes. Would you like us to do that?
Yes, I would actually, yeah. And then I do have some other questions, but I wouldn't mind because I'm.
Lisa Rose is going to actually do it.
Okay, so this is a bit of the City of Ottawa's registry page. It's very clear and concise, actually. They've done a good job at providing a lot of information, and read down to the bottom of this page here, there's an area where, as a lobbyist who's already registered, you could log in and select that. We'll go in under the search tool, and
Which is what a resident or anyone who wanted to search the registry, that's where they would go in.
exactly.
Okay.
So how they've set it up here is they've got some keyword searches that you could put in some terminology and do a search on that issue. They do have subject matters that pre-defined subject matters that you can select and do a search on those. So they provide both. You can put in a lobbyist's name if you're searching to see if someone has registered specifically. You've got date ranges that you can search in, and then they as well have put in this search term, whether a specific ward is defined to a specific ward or the entire city. So we'll just do a generic search here, affordable housing, citywide, and we'll do the search. This is what it pulls up.
Interesting.
These are the individuals that have registered on this issue. There's a general description, subject matter description, the person that they've lobbied. Let me see if I can enlarge this a little, yeah. And the person that they've lobbied here, the dates. And we'll just click on here, view activity. This provides for, again, expansion on the date parameters that were in the previous column.
So this includes not only the visits, but this includes emails, any correspondence between them? I didn't realize that it went that far. It's quite comprehensive.
So emailing is lobbying.
It's any type of communication.
Wow, okay. That's much broader than I. Okay.
So we'll just.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Now, Ottawa has just set this up through you, Chair. They're in the beginning stages of this. Could you touch on a couple of things for me? One would be, when it was up and running, how long the planning process was and what the costs were.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chairman, they went live in September of 2012.
Okay.
So they're not within their first year yet. It took them much about the beginning of the year. They had actually gone through a whole governance review, and so it was probably since the new term started in 2010 that they started on this governance review that included lobbying. They started working on the tool probably 6 to 8 months before it went live.
Okay.
So that's basically.
It's quite impressive. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And perhaps, I do have other questions and other slides, but I think perhaps, whoa, before you close it down, through you, Mr. Chair, there may be questions from other committee members, so I'm certainly willing to come back.
Okay, well, my speaking orders is next, Councillor Whitehead, and David Rose. Councillor?
On this particular
Yes, no,
slide.
I'm just going to go down, people have questions, so.
Well, I still have questions on other slides.
Oh, well, go ahead.
What I'm saying is that though, if there are people who want to comment on this one, rather than moving off this one.
And I appreciate Councillor Parks giving us that opportunity. I have no questions on this slide, so I will reserve my questions for
Okay.
Councillor
Did David on the
Parks.
slide?
Yes, it says activities, what is it, and it says view, now what would be under that portion?
So, click on this. This provides for the actual detailed activities of whether it was an email, okay, correspondence or, I mean, this just demonstrates the method of communication was by email. It could be a conversation between two individuals. Just this example is not showing that. I can see if there's another example that will demonstrate different type. Okay, so this was conducted, this was done during the meeting.
So there is some detail of what the conversation is taking.
These parameters would be laid out so that
Okay.
The issue contains,
That's right, that was what I was interested in, see, because there's always going to be, there'll be long-term issues, and that'll be going on for quite a while, so I just wondered if, in fact, that is always updated as it moves along. That's all.
On the slide, now that
I knew that would happen.
if, I'm trying to think on the email side, we've heard it with the airport, for example, where there's a competitive interest, meaning that they could be compromised, so it is confidential information. How does that get covered off in this kind of context?
I think
my understanding is they have an option for, I believe it's staff that's being approached in the clerk's office about that type of situation, and they will enter it under a protected code, and that will be lifted once the information is publicly available and no longer confidential.
So there's an option when you get approached, whether it's a development or the airport or whatever, and they want to make their case and whatever they're lobbying for, so they delve into some of the competitive issues. But if it's put out there, then obviously it puts them at a disadvantage competitively. They're protected through this process.
That's what I understand Ottawa is doing in those circumstances. There may be questions about whether there's statutory protection or not. There were requests for information.
how do they do that, Lisa? If someone comes in and is proposing an investment in our community and wants to test the waters to see whether something will be palatable, and clearly it's confidential for competitive reasons, financing reasons, land purchase reasons, a whole host of, what's the lobbyist do then to make sure he complies with a bylaw while at the same time protecting his? Does he still have to go down to the clerk's office and register and just say confidential, or do nothing?
I'm speaking from what Ottawa does. I have no idea what Toronto does under these circumstances. They go to the clerk's office and it's screened, and if it's acceptable, it's given this protected code. So they still enter all the information, fill in all the blanks, but it doesn't show up on the search. It won't be searchable until it becomes a public.
If you notice, there's a status at the very top of the screen here. There's a status reflection there, and that this says approved. Anything that you'll see that's up here identifies that it's been approved.
So that they go through that process for everyone, not just the confidential ones. Whether it's approved for them to go and meet with the. Does somebody actually have to approve a lobbyist before they can have the appointment, or they just have to register?
Yeah, from what I know, there's an approval process each time. And I don't know that it's,
Okay, and then the obvious question is, how do you do that when an email shows up in your email box? How does someone get approval to send that to you?
no, I think, yeah, sorry.
This is in person, this is just in person you get approval? But they can send emails in.
No, I think that the information is all, it's just almost like a sign off of someone, the lobbyist is registering themselves, right? They're inputting all this information themselves. Someone in the clerk's office will, I guess, look at the information and post it. In that sense, it'll be approved as posted. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah. That's
So
what
that email cannot be sent by that individual to an elected official until that approval is done.
In the
no, I
Ottawa
believe-
model, it works the other way around. In
Yes.
the Ottawa model, the lobbying can occur as long as the lobbyist
follows up by registering a return. You know, if I lobbied Councillor so-and-so last week, they have a period of time, I'm not sure the specific period of time, but so the onus is on, in Ottawa's case, the individuals being lobbied have to check constantly to see that those are shown. In
Okay,
Toronto,
does-
they
does-
register first.
Does the same thing apply to telephone calls, because it's a form of communication?
Yes, it's all of us.
So we can't field our lobbyists, and we're going to get into what's the role of the elected official in this. And I know there's a number of different models that I've read about. But a person should not pick up the phone and call us or drop us an email until they register as a lobbyist.
Yes, they should have registered as lobbies first.
Okay, interesting. Let's do.
It sounds a little cumbersome, and I don't think, but the onus is on the lobbyist, not on you.
Depends on what model you pick, from what I read.
Right, but I'm thinking that the onus still remains with the lobbyist. And they decided to communicate with a phone, they would have to update that transaction on the phone if it is protected. If it's an ongoing issue that they protect their interest, well, there may be a future investment. It would still go into that system. And then eventually, they call all the emails, all the telephone calls, all the personal contacts, everything else. Once it's approved, then it becomes open to the public. But I think, I may be wrong, but what I'm understanding is the onus still remains with the lobbyists.
Janice?
Okay, so I think the answer is yes and no. The lobbyist carries a big burden to make sure that they register. Depending on the model, they either have to register before they make any attempt to lobby, or they have to register in following up a lobbying effort. As to the amount of protection they get, I think that it's virtually none unless they can demonstrate some incredible need for confidentiality. And I haven't followed up with Ottawa or Toronto, and Lisa and Rose are, I guess, aware of the Ottawa model. But the idea of having confidentiality while you do the lobbying is a rare exception, not a general rule. The general rule is lobbying is fully transparent. There may be the rare exception that it can be demonstrated that there's an absolute need for confidentiality at a certain point so that something can perhaps, germinate. But my sense of lobbying generally is that's going to be a very rare exception in a very limited time period when there's any kind of confidentiality, and there's still a need to register. The big burden is on the lobbyist, but in the Toronto model, if the public office holder allows themselves to be lobbied by an unregistered lobbyist, they can be the subject matter of a complaint to the Integrity Commission first.
Sure.
So there is a bit of a burden on them.
It's just an example though, Janice. Yesterday, I walked from the council chambers to my office. The lobby there was full of people in the arts community. I got stopped by 4 different people. I was clearly being lobbied. Would the elected person then say, can't talk to you to register? Can you have those casual conversations as you're walking through the halls of the City Hall?
Well, it would depend very much on the model that Hamilton decides to go with. So if Hamilton went with the Toronto model, because it's a continuum, so over at the one extreme, you've got the Toronto model, and in the Toronto model, you would, I would think, be well advised to say, wait a minute, are you registered to lobby? I'm not sure of all of the exceptions in the Toronto model for sort of casual conversation in the lobby, but generally those kinds of things are intended to be captured if they're really an attempt to lobby. In the Ottawa model, which is sort of in that less extreme version, the council member could say, yeah, I'm open to this conversation, with the proviso that you're lobbying me, and so you should be going and registering this lobbying after we have a conversation.
Terry?
Well, I'm just concerned that we've got open for business, our committee, and the last thing we want to do is put more barriers up for significant investments in our community. And I can think of an example of a film industry a number of years ago when I was with the federal government looking into Hamilton, actually a studio, and big studio, and they met with the councillors. I was not a councillor at the time, I was working with the federal government, so I wanted to be clear. But they made it absolutely clear that this could be blown, completely blown, if anything gets out. They did, because they need to get the land, acquire the land, and so forth, which they were in the process of doing. So I guess my concern is that there was confidentiality in the context of this new business. There was confidentiality in the context of where they were going to actually purchase the land. It did get leaked. They walked. So I guess my point is there's got to be some element of sensitivity when you're looking at first-time investors in our community making significant investments, that you respect to some level. I mean, at some point it has to be all real. To me, it doesn't have to be real time, as long as at some point judiciously it's reported. So to me, it's more about timing than it is about whether. I think at some point you need to reveal it. I have no issue with that. My issue is though that you need to be sensitive, not putting more barriers into. And it doesn't happen often, so I'll put that out there as well. But it can happen. That you don't want to jeopardize a potential investment either by having something that could compromise their investment and intent in the community. So I prefer something that is not always, respects those circumstances and is not necessarily real time, but also understands that there's a duty and responsibility for transparency, that at the correct time, that information eventually will be put out there to the community.
That is exactly the kind of conversation that this committee needs to engage in, to help staff to come back with an actual draft that can work in Hamilton for this council. I mean, that's the reason there's a variety of options here for information, because there's a whole spectrum that council can move towards, and very definitely there are business interests who are, you know, reluctant sometimes to engage in, you know, sort of it's not that they don't want to engage in dialogue with levels of government, but, you know, they don't necessarily want to, I guess, tip their hand to competitors. Those are things that council have to have in their minds. Staff are here to bring information and to try to help sculpt and create something that can work for this council.
So, and I think that's what we're doing. So we just need to understand where the sensitive points are. Understanding the ultimate goal and objective is get as much out there in regards to transparency and account, which I don't have an issue with. Although there might be financial cost-benefit analysis. That's another debate, but I want to give Judy the floor back. But certainly my concern is, and we've had businesses that we're looking at three different locations. Hamilton just was one of them. And the last thing, and again, make it clear to us that they haven't selected yet, and they certainly wouldn't want anything out there. And again, if they're compromised, you mark Hamilton off the list, there goes your investment down the road. So there has to be sensitivity to those types of circumstances. And we can mold that.
So I guess maybe you can conclude, I guess it comes back to us, where do we decide that that issue of confidentiality, about the issue of confidentiality. I guess that's what it comes back to us, and then we put it back out there. And I guess the question would be, who would decide where that restriction would be imposed or wouldn't be imposed? Would that be through the clerk's office? Would it go through council, legal counsel first, with recommendations?
Yes,
I would think that's the kind of thing that you need to put through. In this report, what's being suggested is that as a bare minimum for this, you need an FTE to build the system and maintain it. That's an IT person. And you need an FTE and clerks to provide the kind of interpretation. And that's an ongoing, permanent ongoing thing, just to deal with the bare minimum, you know, questions and training and issues such as this. And I would suggest that that's where that decision point would be, and there would be some parameters and criteria built in to the actual bylaw and policy to make sure that that's not, you know, ad hoc, that there's some consistency to how that's interpreted, but that would reside with a staff level position to make those kinds of determinations and maybe consult with the lobbyist registrar if there's any issue.
So we have to build that right into the bylaw and stuff. The interpretation.
Some guidance for how that will be interpreted.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go back to you now, Judy.
Yes, thank you. Is everybody done with this slide now? All right, thank you. Lisa, if you could please go to, past this, to process to implement, please. Many people does it take to read the slideshow?
No.
Sorry, I'm going forward to.
The next one is process to implement. There we go. There we go. Okay, so on this one, where we talk about the staff resources, let me start with, at the very bottom point, we say the appointment of a lobbyist registrar. Sorry. So if we did this, and I just want to get some clarification here. So Hamilton, we already have an integrity commissioner, and we already have an auditor general. So if we appoint a lobby registrar, we would be only one of 2 municipalities out of 433 in the province.
That's correct.
That's pretty substantial. I mean, I would say that that's, even with just the 2 that we have then, it sounds like we're the best of, what, 30 out of 433? Is that the number I saw? Just to clarify.
443.
Sorry, say that again.
443.
443. So we've really done quite well at this point as a city. But I want to come to the staff resources, because in the report, we talk about the need for 2 full-time FTEs, right? 2 FTEs. And one is for the clerk's office, which perhaps I can see that, because certainly looking at the Ottawa model, there's a tremendous amount of administration work there. But when it comes to the IT person, and I had this discussion with some of the other committee members, so they may want to jump in here. But we have some templates that are existing already on our website. Understanding we're going to be blowing up our website and rebuilding it. And we can't do that soon enough as far as I'm concerned. But do we really need to have an IT person designated to this? We have some existing templates, and I look at the customer service one as an example. What would be the difference between going online to the template that already exists for customer service and using that for the lobbyist to register? Through you, Mr. Chair. To whoever would like to answer that.
Well, we have an IT person in the review.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer. We estimated the 1 FTE mainly because when we were asked to provide input into this,
Right.
to estimate what it would cost to put the tool up and running for the lobbyist register, we did assume worst case scenario, mainly because we weren't clear on all the requirements for the actual tool. If it becomes something that we can use that's currently existing, then we may not need 1 FTE. So we came up with that partly for that reason. The other reason was we did talk to City of Ottawa to learn from their experience in putting up a lobbyist register system, and they explained to us that the tool that they put up required additional resources in the IT division to continue to sustain and operate that tool.
So Toronto was willing to share their system with us, but is Ottawa willing to do that?
So I don't know the answer to that, so I apologize, Council Partridge, because the individual that did most of this work and had the dialogue with Ottawa was Al Little, and he's on vacation this week. So
Okay, that's fair.
I unfortunately don't have the answer to that.
Okay, that's fair.
Rose?
So can I piggyback up? Sorry, Rose.
Well, I was just going to provide just a little bit of information if it helps clarify, Mr. Chair, through you. The city of Ottawa, it was an in-house application, so they actually
Right.
built it. And the province had offered at that time any assistance. It's It's really an old system, and they're actually going to be replacing it at this point in time, so there was no value in
I
the
understand that,
old
yeah.
system, so
Yeah.
yeah, there was no value in that.
Okay.
Janice?
And so I had asked for a little further information on this point as well, to try to understand, because we're getting cooperation from Ottawa and information, but we know that Ottawa is doing some things in-house, and we know that Ottawa is really just in the initial steps of getting up and running. So really their experience is, as you've heard, less than a year. And Toronto, we know from, hearing and reading, et cetera, that they have a system that has really, I guess they've got a bit of a state-of-the-art system that's become very expensive. And so I wanted to find out a little more information. And I was just blown away to learn that, for example, on the operating budget side, in 2008, their actual expenditures, which was at the early point in their Office of the Lobbyist Registrar, was $612,000. That was their operating cost. Their operating cost for 2012 was $1.05 million. So it's effectively double.
Quite substantial.
But more surprisingly is on the IT side. I don't have what their starting point on the IT side was, but what I do have is their proposal to move to what they call state of good repair of the lobbyist registry from 2012 to 2021 will take $2 million.
Interesting.
Now, I don't know what it costs to build what they've got. My feeling in talking to Rose and Lisa and Mike putting this together was we don't really know. There's only 2 places that even have a lobbyist registrar in Ontario. Toronto is one with that full enchilada.
Yes.
Ottawa's just taking a small bite, and they're new. So being conservative, we thought 2 FTEs, one to build and sustain the IT, and the other to provide some support to get it interpreted and properly, trained and people understanding it. That's sort of the bare essentials.
Okay, and I do appreciate that through you, Chair. And here, a couple of comments here. Here's my concern. My concern is that if we make this bigger than it needs to be, then it's just going to continue to grind on and grind on and grind on. But if we chunk it off and do some manageable, put a manageable process in place that will work using some of the things that we've got, and understanding that we really don't have a template to follow. So in a way, we're kind of creating our own. But where we have things existing, let's start with that and not make it this monster project that has an equally monster budget attached to it, when perhaps it's not really necessary. I want to make a comment too about further on in the slide, and I won't take you through because others have questions, but 2 comments. I feel that we need to be really careful, as was mentioned earlier by Councillor Whitehead, about scaring away any more investment into our community. Lord, we have worked so hard and come so far to be on that, now we're going right into business development, economic development. We are getting the businesses moving here, and I really want to make sure that we can leverage that. So whatever we do, whatever gets approved, whatever happens or doesn't happen, my personal opinion is I would like it to apply to council and to start with the bylaws being about lobbying council members, and whatever that's going to look like. But again, I'm really concerned about affecting our 1.5 billion in permit values that we've been able to reach to, which has a huge impact for our residents and our taxpayers. I don't want to see this turned into a monster that it doesn't need to be. And I'll wait to hear what others have to say about that as well. But and I'm concerned that if we're talking to residents while we're in a grocery store, my husband says I'm not allowed to go grocery shopping anymore because it takes 3 hours to get me out of the store. So he's taken it up, which is great. But if I'm having a conversation with someone in a grocery store, do I need to be concerned about that? You know, I heard a little bit about that, but again, I just don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be. That just has me a bit concerned. So those are kind of some of my comments at this point, Mr. Chair, but I'll turn it over to the rest of the committee.
Jerry?
Yeah, I guess the question is how much do we pay for peace of mind? The Bellamy report is the genesis in regards to municipalities, especially in Toronto, and that's when they had suggested the not only the lobby registry, but obviously the Integrity Commissioner and Ombudsman. I read that report pretty thoroughly, and clearly there was a void and a need for accountability as what transpired over that period of time of the whole computer deal, whatever it was. So I understand there's an anchoring in some parts of the community for more openness and transparency, and that's the essence of this. So you had a slide up there, and the slide indicated that, and this is why it bothers me, because people believe, there's some that believe because you're a lobbyist, you're a pariah, and that's why I'm having trouble with the terminology, because the reality is that part of democracy and decision making is you're going to have people representing many different points of view or many different issues, or whether it's financial or otherwise, and that is part of democracy and their ability to communicate. What the community is demanding, or I'm getting a sense of, is they want to have a little more open transparency in regards to who's communicating with who on what. And that's what the lobby registry is all about. So in principle, I support it. I guess the issue for me, though, is I don't know if there's ever been a cost-benefit analysis. So, for example, in Toronto, they've had an experience for a number of years. We did have the Toronto Commissioner come in and ask a number of questions, and clearly there's been no charges or anything else, if I remember right. And was there a change in a noticeable change or measurable change in regards to whatever is measurable as a result of the lobby registry in Toronto? I don't know what you would measure, if it is measurable, or if there's been a noticeable change as a result of the actual benefit of the lobby's register. I don't think that's ever been measured. Whether it can be measured, it'd be helpful if it can, but so that leaves an open question. I guess the other point that I want to highlight quickly is there's economies of scales when you deal with these kinds of things. And, you know, larger the community, I think greater the capacity and maybe even greater the need, because the more trade, more interaction, more and so forth. Smaller the community, less capacity, less ability to deliver. I mean, I don't think you're going to find lobby registries in small communities, or rural communities, or anywhere else, because there's just capacity's not there, and it doesn't make sense. And at the end of the day, what's the cost-benefit analysis, or what is the real benefit? But as you get into larger communities, obviously, people will believe that there is a benefit. Are we at that threshold of over 500,000? I would say yes. I mean, I think we're at that threshold. The question is, what does our model look like? We can't be Toronto. We can't afford to be Toronto. We don't have the capacity to be Toronto. We can't be Ottawa. Again, for the same reasons. So the question is, how do we design a system that meets the underlying principle of openness, transparency, and accountability, at the same time be affordable and be acceptable? And that's, I guess, why we're here, is to design a made-in-Hamilton solution, understanding that we have our own financial limitations. So I think that a lot of the tools that was presented here probably give us a lot to think about in regards to broader the scope, more of the work, more of the oversight, more of the cost. Just clear as day. So the question is, what is the primary focus we want to identify and clearly take care of, and which ones can we live without being part of that scope, so we can limit the cost and still meet the needs in baby steps in regards to what some of the community are asking for. So I would envision, Chair, as we go through some of the options and so forth, that we would have no real choice in regards to cost and cost implications and cost benefit. To design a system that has a more narrow in scope, to capture the key concerns, at least, I think that's through consultation, by the way, key concerns of the community, so that we can capture that without throwing a huge net out. And that would be driven not because we don't want to throw a big net out, it's because of capacity. I want to make that clear to the community that we have to limit based on our size and scope. So I would hope that as we go through that, my colleagues would understand that broader the scope, more the cost. More narrow the scope, less the cost. And then we can find where that balance is. The needs, at least the current needs, in the first steps of this community. At the same time, we finally get a framework in place that we could be proud of. So those are my general comments, Mr. Chair. I think the real work begins now in the context of what the main handle solution is. And I want to thank staff because this was a very, very, very good presentation. Very good in the context of the options and the scopes and the implications and so forth. So it gives me a lot of tools to work with my colleagues here to make a main handle solution. We're not going to do it today, but I think we have a lot to work with, and maybe we can set some dates and targets so that we can eventually get this in some form in place.
Okay, thank you. Let me take a chair for a second, Judy.
Oh, sorry, one other question. I need to ask this. The other concern, I mentioned the lobbyists are pride. My concern is, I mean, already, for example, we clearly disclose financial contributions to the center. It's clearly regulated by the province of Ontario and it's filed with the clerks. And now there's an impression that because you donate that you should be in a conflict position. Well, that's not the case. It's clearly not the case. My concern is because we may get caught up in that kind of minutia where now that you've got a lobby register because you met with somebody, now you can't vote on that particular issue. That's how these things could be distorted. So as we move forward, Mr. Chair, I want to make sure that we set a sort of I don't know if it's a statement to clearly understand the purpose of and the role of the lobby registry and the fact that it is not to preclude, quite frankly, individuals or councillors for making decisions regardless of the lobby, or within whoever the lobby is, whatever the project is, we have to vote on that project. Because you can imagine a lobby's being 15 councillors, all of a sudden 15 councillors can't vote on it. It doesn't make sense. I wanted to make that because I think that's important that we have that kind of, well, I don't know what you call it, but a precursor. Maybe we could help the chair through staff.
Yes, through the chair. I mean, that really is a very, very good point. That does require a sort of an education/communication piece to accompany this when it comes forward and before it actually lands, so that people understand. And I think you were referring, Councillor Wade, to the slide that started, lobbying is not wrong. You know, just as contributing to an election campaign is not wrong, it's regulated, but it's not wrong. And the last thing that any municipality wants to do is discourage lobbying, which active lobbying is a part of our democratic system and the process. And just like many municipalities provide a tax rebate for contributions to election campaigns, it's encouraged to be involved. There's a number of rules around it, but it's not meant to imply that somebody's doing something improper. It's completely proper. So that requires sort of a whole communication piece that we would have to, you know, once we have something in place and we're coming forward, I would think maybe.
But you should probably just in the introductions or in the definitions.
Yeah. And
just so it's clear.
Spell it out, but also accompany with probably some public pieces that indicate Hamilton is moving in this direction, and it's recognized that these things are good components of the democratic process.
I thought that was worth entirely considering.
Well, I had my name first, but don't.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Oh, then I'll take the chair.
You don't need to correct me on this all the time. I'll to
And I live to do that.
I know. Go ahead.
I appreciate that, Chair, and I'll be relatively quick. So through you, again, I think Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Partridge have summed it up pretty well. I think it's the sense of let's figure out what it is we're trying to achieve out of this, and let's let's find a sort of Hamilton solution that achieves those goals. And I think it's the ultimate, we're trying to achieve the best we can around transparency and accountability related to lobbying. And again, I guess that's where my comments sort of come from, is we've seen the sort of the Rolls Royce, at least that exists within that sector of lobbyist registry. So we've seen Toronto, we've seen what Ottawa has done. The costs here, and again, I appreciate what staff has done, is sort of providing that sort of that estimate piece, but ultimately, as Councillor Partridge has mentioned, I think there are tools in place, and what I've envisioned, sitting around this table for the last little while, is a very simple application that already exists within the city that achieves the goals of, here's who I am, this is what I want, this is who I'm going to talk to, and an expiry on that. So essentially you have a bunch of check boxes that says, here's who all the information that you can fill in, here's who I'm going to talk to about this, whether it's by department, whether you want drop down for councillors or councillor-wide or mayor or whatever those qualifications are that you have within your bylaw that you establish. But that already exists. Like that's not something that's new to the city of Hamilton, whether it's now or whether it's through a redesign process or a redesign mechanism through your website. That exists already. So, the $100,000 for development, no, that doesn't exist anymore. I've always envisioned, and again, I know you're just setting the time frame, so I'm not trying to be critical of it, but if you're talking about administration from a policy analyst perspective, to me, that's not a policy analyst, that's an administrative function. The person that's making the determination of whether or not you're in compliance with that bylaw or providing advice to that bylaw is that lobbyist register that you're trying to hire, right? That's the same way we do that you guys do for the integrity commissioner, right? The integrity commissioner provides advice related to the code of conduct. So the lobbyist register should provide advice to lobbyists and to councillors and to the public on that lobbyist register piece. So to me, that administration piece is exactly that. It's not a policy analyst at 92 grand estimate, of course. It's an administrative function at whatever the going rate is or band is from an administrative function in the city of Hamilton. The IT support is there, right? The IT support is there within the function of the city itself, right? So again, maybe you do need somebody specifically for the IT of it, but again, that exists already within the city. So again, the combination of the roles between the lobbyist registry and integrity commissioner, I think, would be appropriate. To me, that gets the fear factor away from that cost piece. I think it's an appropriate model for the city, for a city the size of Hamilton, and I think it ultimately achieves the goals of what you want to achieve. Now, I know I'm speaking in sort of general, 5,000-foot terms, but I think that works. Ultimately, as well, and I won't go into the comments that I have around the bylaw as well. I think it's actually quite well done. I have some questions and a couple of comments, but I think it also allows us not to have to start over on this. Like, I think we can move forward relatively expeditiously with the existing tools that the city has, and again, to satisfy what it is ultimately not only council's trying to achieve, but what the public would expect from its council and from its municipality.
Okay. Well, we get some progress, good chance.
So I just want to sort of jump in and speak right out and explain a couple of things. First of all, just a point of clarification, like 92,000 is not really the salary, that would be salary and benefits. That's probably a $74,000 salary, bumped up by the 23% for benefits. That's just how we do it.
Thank you.
In terms of that FTE position, I mean, there is certainly an argument, or there's an assumption of where do you put that? Do you put that FTE person with the lobbyist registry, as they've done in the Toronto model? That's the office of the lobbyist registrar, which has 7 full-time staff, or the provincial model where the office of the lobbyist registrar has 13 full-time staff. In this case, the thinking was that the lobbyist registrar would be a sort of a per diem model like the integrity commission would kind of scale that back so that they don't have their own staff. It's just basically the investigator who would deliver the sanction, depending on what sanctions the bylaw would contain. Versus, so if you think of the integrity commissioner that the city has, versus the model that, let's take the privacy commissioner, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner for Ontario. So if you call down and you had a question, they might give you some guidance on things before you ever put in a complaint. If you called the lobbyist registrar, the meters run. You've got a per diem, and you don't want to initiate a complaint, you want to ask a question. You're a lobbyist, you think you might be a lobbyist, you want to ask an interpretive question. Am I a lobbyist? Do I really fit? I'm kind of in-house to a particular group, we get a little bit of grant money. Do I need to register as a lobbyist? So who you would ask might be that policy analyst person. That's what we kind of called it, for lack of a better term. And so our thinking was, the clerk has a very legitimate concern that who's going to be, where does that call get directed? Would it go to Rose and her staff? Would it go over to legal, to myself, to Lisa? It's going to bounce around. Are you going to get consistency in those interpretations? Do you really want to create an FTE that reports to a per diem accountability officer? So it was just a place to land it. But I think the thinking is that really there is more than just those calls. There's the initial startup. So all of members of council need to have training and understanding around this. Training sounds simple, but an understanding of how this works and helping to message it. And then the lobbyists themselves are going to want to understand how it works. So there's that body of training, education, interpretation, assisting in the smooth kind of running of that. That's what we kind of thought was the body of work that falls to that FTE. Could it be less than that? I think, frankly, we don't think so. Because it's new to Hamilton, there aren't enough models out there, and we're trying to go away from the full enchilada model to a very small, affordable and functioning model. So we think that that's kind of the baseline.
Appreciate it.
Just a little point on there, but what about the retainer? The integrity commissioner has the retainer, and he's asked to provide advice to councillors, maybe even the public. The meter doesn't start running on that point, it only starts to run when the complaint is actually lodged. Is that not correct?
No, through the chair, that's not correct.
Every time
I believe we're paying invoices for the time that the integrity commissioner spends dealing with the environment.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, just a point of advice, if the council was to call them up and say, I have an issue and I'm not quite sure of how I should approach that, you mean you're telling me that the meter starts running as soon as you make that phone call?
I would think so.
Yeah.
So what do we do with the retainer?
If he's doing investigation, that's to keep him available to us. And then
Well, I thought that clause of the contract there, he was supposed to set up the original contract, that he was supposed to set up a website. There was a number of issues that detailed what his duties were, and I thought some of that was making himself available for training for staff included in that, in his role.
But if he gets a call, I would suspect, and staff can help me with this, if he gets a call from Terry saying, hey, I have this issue, I'm not sure whether I'm in conflict or not, can you let him, he'll take a couple days before he gets back to me. I know when I had, he took a month and a half, got back to me and gave me an answer. And he's not going to do that for free. He's going to expect to get paid when he's doing that.
Okay. No, I just thought, it's been a while since I looked at the contract, and I'm trying to remember what was required in those days as part of that retainer, that's all.
Okay, Ben, Judy, will you take the chair? You're going to have a...
I will, absolutely. Go ahead,
I'll
Councillor.
come back to you next, Terry. Or, you want to go now, Ed?
Yeah, it's very good. The question I failed to ask.
What you doing for? I'm the chair.
I give it to you.
Go ahead, Terry.
And this is for staff. So I'm dealing with the development in my community. Consultations taking place. Clarity. It's clear that, for example, the community doesn't want a 14-story high building in their backyard. So now I'm contacting the developer to come into my office to see if I can get some kind of compromise. Who's lobbying who?
Okay.
That's very, very common.
Yeah, it is very common through the chair. That's really really not lobbying at all. I mean, the developer is going through a process, and that process is defined, following your application through the process is not even included in lobbying. That's sort of exempt from the lobbying, that was on one of the earlier slides, so that what is lobbying versus what isn't lobbying, that isn't lobbying. If a developer is making inquiries, if the residents are making inquiries about it, they too are not lobbying, they're following a process, following the development application process, and trying to figure out what's happening with it. So that would be exempt from lobbying. And if you are trying to, negotiate or mediate a better resolution to that planning application, that is not lobbying either. So none of those would be.
So I initiate the call, I guess back on the principle, if I initiate or councilor initiates the call, because they're trying to, not to reply to a call, but actually initiate a call because we're trying to do the best in the context of our ward or what the issue is. Even though that person would qualify as a lobbyist in the context of the lobbyist registry.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it's not who initiates the call, otherwise there would be really no lobbying, the lobbyist would say, call me.
I did say we initiate.
It's not really, so through the chair, it's not who initiates the call, it's the fact that the conversation is between a development applicant and a member of council about something that's fully in the public process. So it's captured within the whole public process of a planning application.
I appreciate that. I just wondered.
Okay, take the chair now. And just a couple of points. One thing I'd like us all to focus on when we're going through this debate, I think, David, or you touched on this, is what's the problem we're trying to fix? Is it simply to let the public feel that we're being more transparent to them? Or is there another problem over there? That should be a guiding principle of what it is we're trying to fix, what we want to invest in to try to fix something that may or may not be broken. I agree with Judy that if we're going to do this, we need to start out with the council only, just to, not make this thing bigger than what we need to. I read in the Ottawa model, not the Toronto or Ontario one, but the Ottawa model, it says that the public officer is responsible for checking the lobbyist registry and reporting any lobbying for return that has not been filed. I think that would be incredibly arduous to do. Yeah. I don't even know the 4 people that stopped me yesterday to lobby me about the arts, let alone getting downstairs within 15 days and making darn sure they went down and registered. I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, I get about 100 emails a day, probably half of them are lobbying. I got to make sure 50 emails a day. I'm running downstairs every 15 days to make sure that I don't know how many phone calls I take. My staff take most of the phone calls, and I don't return where I have to, because the clerk's office has buried meetings all day, so we can't sit by the phone. But it would be terribly arduous to expect us to make sure that anybody that ever spoke to us go downstairs and register as a lobbyist. I'm also concerned that if this thing includes not only people to come to visit you, but also emails, telephone calls, the grocery store, the lobby. I don't know how, if each one of us had 50 emails a day that's lobbying, somebody's asking for something, and that the person in that office, multiply that by 16, there's 16 of us, how they're going to check them all and approve them all and do that with one person. I think I'm going to go back to Terry's issue. We've got to make this thing a little simpler. I'm not sure, and think about whether we need to cascade this to emails and phone calls or to people that come to visit us. I think from the reaction of the 3 of us, I think it caught us by surprise that it does include emails and telephone calls. Also, I'm elected to represent the people of Ancaster, and they can damn well call me if they want to. That's my job. They shouldn't have to run to a lobbyist registry first. And so if they're your own constituents, and I see that is the case in Toronto, where if you don't have to get a person to register if they live in your ward or in the case of in your city. That might make it easier because then we can do our job and represent our constituents and respond to their questions, which is why they go to the ballot box and elect us to do that. And the confidentiality part, and we need some thought about how we can protect an investor who's still negotiating with his financiers, still negotiating with a property owner, and that property owner were to find out somehow that somebody's interested in his land, as we saw in Scott Park, the price went up by 50 times. We have to be able to protect their confidentiality. If they want to come and just test waters with us, is this something that you might be on side to, like in your city or your ward or your community? And if we say, get out and don't ever come back, that gives them a pretty clear message. You say, okay, well, I need to get, we need to go through the process, we planning, and that is something I'll give consideration to. It knows whether they go next steps or whether they head out to Waterloo or St. Catharines or Niagara, because as we found out in our Open for Business subcommittee, there's a lot of competition out there. Other municipalities trying to attract investment to bring jobs and tax revenue into our city. So when you're drawing this thing up, I'd like you to keep those things in mind, and once again, try to keep it as simple as you can for us. Otherwise, it's just, we'd all need an extra assistant in order to have them keep track of who we're talking to make sure they get downstairs, to make sure we get registered. And I'm not sure that's affordable either. I'll take a chair back.
Before you do that, I'll put Terry on the list as well. I'm not sure if you have a speaker's list. And Dave, did you?
Yeah, Dave was going to ask.
first?
Do you want to go to Dave first?
Oh, yeah, no. Go ahead.
Dave.
Okay, I made some notes, so I'll pass that around. They're just going to start at number 6, like the maybe staff would want.
Well, Dave, I just got one quick point.
Sure.
If you don't mind. In the Bellamy report, well, we need to clearly understand, I know you want to just start with councillors, but you need to understand that many of the reports that we receive are already being formulated. And those reports, and that's the Bellamy experience, is developed by and overseen by senior staff. So a lot of times you want to make sure that the reports are being objective and so forth, that there's accountability relative to, and that's why you got a lobby registry. I'd be a little concerned not including at least the senior staff because some of the senior staff were implicit in regards to what transpired in Toronto, quite frankly. So I think it's important that not just the politicians get caught up in this, but the senior staff should be part of it. So I don't see it rippling all the way down, but again, trying to contain the scope to the directors and the managers. But I think at the very beginning, at least at the start, it should be the senior, the CMT, and council. Limited to that for now, and then we can review it in a couple of years to see if it's too broad or needs to be narrow.
Okay. Dave.
Okay, I think we probably dealt with the first 5 so far, so I was going to start with number 6, point on number 6, and it says, under the lobbyist registrar, I was hoping that the Integrity Commission would be able to take on this position as long as he or she was outside. Positions don't compromise the ability to fulfill the obligation of those positions. Has anyone ever spoken to the Integrity Commission to see if they take on this additional work? And work since his recent appointment now, the ethics scan, which is involved with some investigations of the RCMP, and it looks like it's getting bigger and bigger every day. So his workload may be getting heavier, and he may not have the ability to take on the additional work. So I was just wondering, in fact, has anybody been able to speak to him and just to see if that is even a viable thing, or should we just forget that altogether, or maybe just go full-time lobbyist registrar? I prefer to see it combined, but I was just wondering if, in fact, he's available and would his workload allow him to do that.
Through the chair, we hadn't approached the Integrity Commissioner at this point, I think, because it would have been being presumptuous on us to sort of engage in that.
Right, I'm just,
Yeah,
because
but
I'm thinking of the
certainly
costs.
it's an idea, yeah, and that's why that's put in the report that, the one column with the combined, where we think there's a combined role, that might work, or the standalone role, which we think is a more expensive way to go, but I don't think, we haven't started to have that conversation just because, well, we're not at that point yet, and we were waiting for sort of a guidance.
I just wondered if his workload would allow him to get into that point, if he could in fact even entertain them. That's because I see that maybe becoming an issue later on. And I'd like to refer to, maybe now, I must compliment staff and great report. This has been probably the most productive we've done in a long time, so thank you very much. We've had an opportunity to, it's taken a while to digest it, and plus all the other material that we've had before. So I was just on page 2 of the draft bylaw under lobby. I'm in favor of the Toronto's definition. It states appeals to members of the public through the mass media or direct communication that seeks to persuade members of the public to communicate directly with the public office holder as an attempt to place pressure on the public office holder to endorse a particular opinion. I'd like to see that make it inclusive. My suggestion. I don't know if we'll leave that for the vote or whatever, but these are some of the issues that are things that I touched on while I was reading the report. Then on page 3, public officer holder preferred Toronto's definition to include members, officers, and employees of some local boards and individuals appointed to the advisory, the standing committee, council, and the local boards. I have no idea what these boards are, because don't know the size of the scope yet of the city, so I don't know how many boards there are and how many, because they all would stand alone on their own budgets, would they not?
Yes.
They have their own standalone, when their budgets are approved, then they're allowed to go out and spend the money as they see.
You know, we have police, you know, we have housing, which is
Right.
15,000 housing units, we got an art gallery, we got
Conservation.
Hamilton, yeah, they have renewable power incorporated,
And then two would be lobbying, which would be,
library board, yeah.
so I would think they too would be lobbying, because they're seeing this, there's a big pile of money out there. And I just quickly took a look at the last 5 years, just the city budget alone, you're almost $5.5 billion over the last 5 years. Your expenses, building permits alone is $4.3 billion. So you're almost talking $10 billion in the last 5 years. That's a lot of money people want to get
Probably
their
more than
hands
that,
on.
aren't we, but with capital budget, with 1.8 per year.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money people like to get their hands on.
Our staff, their hands a lot.
Yes. Oh, I agree. But included with staff was 23% benefits, which people will lobby for, insurance companies, you name it. All these other individuals are
Probably closer to 30%.
Okay, 30%, even better. Pension plans, everything else that all comes involved in that. There's going to be an active lobbying somewhere. And this is where I think we get back to saying lobbying is not a bad thing, but it needs to be transparent. That's all it needs to be. And we're talking about
Just not issue, at least I had a
Sure.
Just through the chair, I know we're at an early stage and we're raising what you saw, which is the whole purpose of putting this before you. I just wanted to mention that Hamilton's practice in accountability and transparency area has not been, even when it has the authority to do so, to impose these, and we went through it, you will recall, the Ontario Commissioner, on its local boards. It's been to communicate what we're doing to them and be open to them to adopt what we're doing or not, just as a background.
Well, in our own bylaw, where there might be already their own processes in regards to, for example, code of conduct or other legislative requirements, that takes precedence over over whatever we do here.
Okay.
David, you have the floor, so.
Okay, no, it was just an observation. It's a lot of money. It's a heck of a lot of money. And somehow we got to,
That's why we have such stringent procurement policies.
no doubt, and everybody in that line will, somewhere along the line, will try to be lobbied by somebody that wants to get a piece of that pie. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of money, and the public should know, at least know where the money's going and how it's going. And we're doing a good job. We work the website posting how the money's being spent. But it'd be nice to see how it's, or who's coming after it. Let's see. I don't know if we want to go through, we've had a chance to, we may have a chance to read some of this. Maybe this is not the time to do it, go through all of this, but we're talking about cost of running this. Is there, one of the things that came to mind, is there a cost recovery system that can be put in place to get the money back to operate
So
this?
Peter registered?
No, not necessarily attached to that. It could be attached to other things, building permits. Could be attached to anything else. A surcharge that would be cost recovery to operate this thing. instead of being a burden being on the tax dollars, can we come find surcharges that would come in to look at to offset, at least offset the cost and not pay the whole cost of the operation? Is that a viable?
Be permitted to.
I think through the chair, it's something you would consider in conjunction with your principles around getting individuals to voluntarily register. So we would have to be conscious of trying to get people to voluntarily register. And our experience is sometimes when there's a fee or a charge that represents an impediment to getting individuals to participate.
But David's saying added to another fee.
But in terms of some of our bylaws with respect to fees and charges, we would look if there is a component that we could try to capture through our fees and charge, we would do so, recognizing with respect to some of our fees and charges, there's provincial legislation and regulation. So for instance, around building, it's legislated as to what activities are considered to be eligible for capturing costs that would relate to user fees. So something we would consider, and we would look at what our authorities and powers are. But again, recognizing that if the principle is in part to get individuals to voluntarily register, is we don't want to placing impediments before that.
David?
And maybe just on the last part here, maybe item 15 there, as it says on the last page of the registry, activities in the province of Ontario, the city of Toronto, and the city of Ottawa. Is there any data on infractions and the outcome of those infractions?
Through the chair, Toronto, I did read the annual reports. They've had, I think, 3 charges and they were withdrawn. And that was the spur that we talked about to Toronto adding an enforcement component for 1.5 FTEs. I'm not aware of Ottawa being any type of enforcement phase at this point.
You finish it?
Yeah, I'll just leave that for your digestion if we want to.
I appreciate that. I'll put some more thought into it and put a page and a half. Terry?
Well, I was going to say, I think we didn't have a presentation from the province and we asked those direct questions. And if I remember right, there wasn't too many charges of any of the province either. And that's a pretty robust system. So, but I don't think, and, I don't want to focus too much on the penalties because it really isn't. You would hope that you're getting more people participating in the process. And it's not a punitive thing. It's a system that is creating more accountability and transparency. So, understanding the question, I just want to put a lot of weight on that piece. I think that there is a greater demand, especially with social media and all the other real live information, real quick. People are getting more access to city business now than they ever have. People obviously are hungry to understand how decisions are being rendered, and they want to make sure that they have all the information in hand. So I think the principle of continuing walking down this road, although I think we have to do it carefully, to open and be more transparent as much as practical as public medicine. So I'm on side for that. Again, as I said earlier, it's the scope and size and cost and capacity. Back to the question that you asked, David, I like what you suggest because the surcharge wouldn't have to be much. You're not looking at recovering a lot of money. And the surcharge could be applied to, it could be very minimal, quite frankly. That barely even noticed amongst all the purchases, for example. I mean, so there could be areas that we can potentially ask staff to look at where there is no legislative impediment. And see if in fact what those areas are, what will generate, and maybe that could be part of the discussion how robust this system is if we know how little impact we can have and how we can perhaps generate additional revenue. So I like that idea. Maybe we could be more robust than I thought without impacting taxpayers directly and without discouraging investment. For example, I'm going to give an example. When you go buy a ticket, concert ticket, there's sometimes minor surcharges for whatever. There might, you very notice that it might be, I don't know, $1.50, whatever. on a ticket price, well, on a $200 ticket or $150 ticket, it really doesn't make a lot of difference. It's not going to discourage you from buying a ticket. So if we could take a look at that kind of approach, it might be worth considering. And again, if we got that information, that might assist us on how robust the system we look at.
Okay, I wonder if we could just start to next day.
Yeah.
Just start to come towards what next steps are. And I'm sensing that, and I know that you have a timeline set up to the report, Janice, and the next was to, I guess, move these minutes to the GIC meeting in June. I wonder whether a more appropriate thing would be, we've got a lot of feedback of what we might include in a draft bylaw, take it away and take a cut at a draft bylaw, bring it back to us and let us digest that, ask questions about it, and then move it on to GIC. Any thoughts on that?
Actually, that makes a lot of sense, because what you really got here is just a lot of information, and we wanted to get some feedback, and that's really what we got. And
You've
I
got a
think
lot of
that
it today, yes.
It's, we were taking a stab at a timeline to show that we are going to keep moving this through. And so I think we really welcome the feedback and the points that David put together, are really helpful as well. And we will do just that. We will take it away and we will craft a draft to bring back, and with the idea that if there's any further feedback we provided at that point, and then if we go on to GIC.
Okay, so let's sort of focus ourselves in towards that objective then, to continue to provide comments to staff, what to include in draft, and they can bring it back to us at the next meeting. David, or Mark?
Thank you through you, Chair. Just a couple comments, and then possibly a motion at the end. I'll see if it's appropriate for you, Chair. The first is, I just want to make a comment. I agree with the fact that we need to be conscious of the fact that there are companies that want to come to Hamilton and they may want to explore sort of opportunities within Hamilton to locate or to do business within Hamilton. I completely agree that there needs to be some provisions in there to protect their pecuniary interest.
Confidential.
Thank you for confidentiality. I disagree with sort of the blanket statement related to constituents and not-for-profits and other groups. And here's the reason why. I think there are a number of, and you guys, councilors, probably know who they are. We have people that live within your ward boundaries who are very influential, who can have impact to a great extent on the decisions that are being made at the council table. Okay? I think if you have a bylaw that describes lobbying and outlines what lobbying is and when it's appropriate to do, or in what lobbying is and when you lobby, it really should not matter who that individual is, whether it's a constituent or whether it is a not-for-profit organization, whomever it is. If they fall within that boundary of what the bylaw describes as lobbying, then they are lobbyists. It really should not matter who that individual is or where they live within the city. Like not-for-profit organizations are amazing work on the backs of many volunteers, and I appreciate that. But ultimately, they can have a huge impact on the city itself. You know, for example, they may come and ask for development charge exemptions, which could have $1 million, tens of $1 million impact on the bottom line of the city. I think the citizens should know if individual not-for-profits are doing that work. So I just caution the fact that I don't support putting language related to constituency or constituents and them lobbying their councillor based on the fact that they are simply constituents. I don't feel that that's appropriate. I think if they fall within the description of what a lobbyist is and what lobbying is, then let's call it what it is. They're lobbyists, and they should be registered and transparent to the rest of not only the council but also the organizations as a whole. My last point is again related to the cost, and this may be a motion. I'm happy to put it in the form of a motion if that's appropriate, Chair. Is that and I thank staff for the information related to the staff component that's been brought forward. But I do feel from an IT perspective that we do need some sort of support around this table, that we're not looking at a separate application for lobbyists for registration, software or whatever the case is. I think that the functionality should be built into an existing tool that currently exists within the city, or that is of a very minimal cost to the city itself. So I would like to, if you feel it's appropriate, Chair, to make a motion that any technology solution is currently within the I don't know, the property, within the capability of the city itself to achieve the goals of this committee's goals around transparency and accountability. I don't know whether you want that.
I'll come back to you for that motion.
Sure.
Write it down just so we understand, because then we can debate it.
Okay.
Terry?
Thanks.
Yeah, just on the one point that David made, and I appreciate and understand, and we haven't made that decision yet, quite frankly, whether we're going to exempt nonprofits or include nonprofits, and that's part of this process. I have no problem not exempting nonprofits, quite frankly. But I'm a little bit worried about, again, how broad we cast that into scope, because then it does mean that there's going to be obviously more work that occurs as a result of it. And my other concern is if a constituent in my ward is just a volunteer and not on the executive or anything on a nonprofit and talks to me about an issue, would that now be a person that would fulfill that lobbyist registry? And I would say, my personal opinion, is no. They're not being paid to take that position, nor are they in an executive position or employee of that nonprofit organization. So I would say that in that circumstance, that individual would be exempt. And that's my opinion. I don't know, I'll bounce that off of staff, if you don't mind, just to see what their understanding is.
Janice, did you hear that question?
I think those are part of the choices that the council makes.
We have to instruct you. We can't.
Well, that's right. I think we're going away to try to create a product that it may, and I was just thinking about this actually a couple of minutes ago, it may still have one or two decision points in it when it comes back and forth.
Oh, I'm
I
sure
don't know
will.
that we have,
Absolutely.
we have a lot of thoughts coming in here, and there's not a consistent 100% agreement that it absolutely must have the constituents to be exempt from that lobbyists or not.
So I just want to distinguish here, just at least off that contrast first, that I do agree with the nonprofit element, because they could have a significant impact. And I hate to say this, but the nonprofit organizations are competing for the very little dollar that we have in regards to what area they represent. So I don't, in my personal opinion, they shouldn't be exempt. I just get concerned when you throw a generic term that they're constituent, that they and they belong to a nonprofit, that they would be a lobbyist. Well, I agree with you if they're part of the executive or paid person within that nonprofit, but they're just an average person that supports Red Cross, for example, and provides me their point of view in regards to Red Cross. I just want to make sure we distinguish that person from what David's talking about.
Okay. And I'll come to you, Judy, then I'll go back to you, David, for your motion. Then I'll look for a second motion to direct staff to go off and take a first cut at the process. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And just to Councillor Whitehead's point, and to David's point, it's all going to come down to the definition. And we will have time to vet that. We will have time to go through that, whether it's at this subcommittee, and then again at GIC. But it will all be captured in that definition, so we will have the opportunity to make sure that we're all comfortable with how that works. I really support what David's saying about using the internal resources for IT as much as possible, particularly the fact that we're rebuilding our website. So now is the perfect opportunity. We're going to be looking at enhancements for that website in terms of being able to pay certain bills on the website and being able to do more of those kinds of transactions. And Mike, I know you're part of that subcommittee along with me as well, and others. So this really is good timing to look at just I don't believe we need additional software that, that kind of Cadillac version of, or Jaguar, whatever you want to put on it, version of a software to come in to do what we want to do. What we need to do is make the decisions and get this done and get it going. So if it ends up in the, in the 2014 budget process, we're going to be looking at perhaps a different figure that's maybe much more doable by, again, chunking this off, working with what we've got, keeping it simple, but it needs to be effective. It needs to be effective. And it all starts with that definition that we're going to come down to. So I think staff have received a lot of information today. I hope it's enough that we can start chipping away and reforming what we really want the meat on the bones to look like. Those are my comments.
David, want to put your motion?
I do.
I'll second.
Great. Sorry, Chair, if I could just through you, just in reply to Councillor White, it would all depend on the definition, right? At the end of the day, what is that definition of a lobbyist? And again, if we want to exempt, individuals that happen to be on and off the profit, but they're just interested in the topic. It all will depend on that definition. But again, what is that definition that we're going to accept? What is a lobbyist? What is lobbying? And that will help provide really clear guidance, not only to council, but to individuals that are looking to interact with council on a specific piece, on a specific issue. So I think I can read my own handwriting. I would move, Chair, that any IT solutions related to the establishment of a lobbyist registry use an existing IT tool within the city that satisfies the goals and objectives of increasing transparency and accountability in regard to lobbying.
Okay, before I go to a second on that, any reaction to staff? Do you want to report back on it first?
So, through the chair, the information that's actually contained in the staff report before you, we did assume an in-house solution with respect to the registry. And so we would continue to hope to utilize that existing in-house solution and just adapt that solution so that functionally it supports what's being asked with respect to the registry. So again, ultimately the model and the data fields that are required will determine the solution, but the objective is to use an existing in-house solution that we've developed for a different purpose and take that solution and adapt it for the purpose of the registry.
So Mike, what I think I heard you say, and just to accomplish this, you're already going to do what David suggested as a motion?
So through the chair again, that was our hope, and that's what we had reflected in the staff report, was to take that existing IT solution, and the cost was adapting that existing IT solution to achieve ultimately what's required in terms of the data captured for the registry.
Okay, David, still before.
Okay, it seems like if that's the case, it seems like a high cost. If that's ultimately, like, let's use the example, let's use the Ottawa example that we just used. That, while it is less than what Toronto has, it's still a pretty major undertaking. So my assumption is that based on using something like, and again, I'm not an IT guy, so I can't really explain it, but most of us have sort of pre-filled sort of forms, like Councillor Pardew mentioned the customer service piece. So you've got a field for your name, address, all your relevant information. It says who you're going to lobby, what are you lobbying at, you're checking boxes. Maybe there's an expiry piece. Now I know that has to go someplace. Someone fills that out, it goes someplace, and then ultimately it has to be either printed or transferred to a public site or public area so people can see it. Maybe searchability isn't what we're looking for. But searchability is a pretty big one. Like, that's a pretty big undertaking. So maybe it's not that Ottawa, I guess here's my assumption. Don't try to replicate Ottawa. And that's maybe my assumption is that's what you're looking at, the cost related to replicating what Ottawa has done. I don't think we're looking at that much. And like, let's use an example, if I can, of, let's look at the provincial application right now. And I know you mentioned, Lisa, they're going to change that. But ultimately, the requirement for them is simply, you're a lobbyist, you're going to lobby, just as I mentioned. Here's who I am, here's who I'm going to lobby, this is how I'm going to lobby. But they don't capture every email transaction, they don't copy every telephone call, they don't capture all of that information. All they do is that it's transparent that an individual or company or whoever that lobbyist is going to lobby, here's what we're going to lobby about, here's who we're going to lobby, and this is how long we're going to lobby for.
So that's more of a direction to legal staff to draft to the bylaw.
That's right.
Information look for rather than to IT.
So,
Yeah, we're hand in hand.
It's a framework
Yeah.
there.
That's right.
So through the chair, I appreciate that further explanation. And I'll start, and then maybe if Craig can jump in. In terms of the solution, I think what we're referring to in terms of the tool, we have an in-house tool that was developed for a different purpose, and we would hope that we would be able to transfer that existing tool. In terms of the cost to adapt, determined ultimately by this subcommittee and council in terms of the scope of information that is going to be collected, and in terms of the searchability that will similarly impact. So that's what they cost. Yeah. And so in terms of that estimated cost, that was assuming the Ottawa model. So staff contacted the Ottawa, or City of Ottawa, had discussed the process in terms of developing their tool, and had estimated the number of hours and associated costs to develop a similar tool.
So yeah, the motion stands, I think, Chair. The motion is essentially to use an in-house tool to achieve the goals that we're looking for around accountability and transparency. So I'm
Except for all we're going to do that. But so it may be redundant.
well, no, I think it's important.
Okay, it's your motion. You want to let it stand, you can.
And I'll second it. I think it's
Okay.
important too.
Discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Carried.
Opposed? Carries. Okay, so we want to place a motion then that we ask staff to report back to the next meeting. Moved by Terry, second by Judy. Discussion on that? All in favor? Carried. So I think we're done for today. Is there anything, unless there's something else?
Well, sorry, if I could, I just want to have a better understanding then. Are we still on timeline, or are we changing the timeline that's been outlined in the report?
If I could just, I have a meeting at Chair at 4 o'clock for a big event in Ancash this weekend, so I can excuse myself.
Okay.
I'm going to let you take the chair.
Yep. Yeah, good plan. Thank you. So could, to staff then, could we just revisit the timeline, just today's questions, and Janice?
Sure, and I think probably, yes, the timeline has not, the back end of the timeline has not changed. But the front end, we're in that first box, we're here June 6th at the Accountability and Transparency Subcommittee. And so what goes in there as the next step, instead of June to GIC, basically a draft bylaw, we would come back here in, I would suggest probably September, with a draft bylaw. And then it would go to GIC, that would be September or October.
So just to clarify that, Janice, when we're looking at the box, and perhaps you could bring that slide up, Lisa, so that we can talk. Was the second to last one? Was Lisa's assistant? Was the second to last?
We're low tech. We're low tech. But we're learning. We're getting.
Hey, that's special.
I think you're getting close. Next steps, there we go. So in terms of the next steps, the top one, it stands the same because that's today. The next one is June, but it's going to, sorry,
Maybe
it's
what
going
we
to change to September.
Maybe what we do is we plug in between those, the first box and the second box, there's like an intermediate box that is September Accountability and Transparency Subcommittee. And then that June date moves to a September date. So we come back to this committee in September, from which it will go to GIC following.
Because the subcommittee is a committee of GIC.
Right.
So that's where we would, whatever we do here, whatever we finalize in September, would then go to GIC for deliberation. So David, is that clear? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, my concern again was more on the back end, and I think
Although, this have to kind of tweak those, it's not a July, August, it just gets pushed to September, and we still are going to be in time for the 2014 budget process. There's plenty of time really for that, because the decisions aren't made until, we put down a range, but it's sometime in the new year, January, February.
But implementation, our goal is that the implementation would be 2014. Once it passes through budget, if it passes through budget, provided it goes to GIC, gets approved, into the budget process gets approved, then it would be implementation in 2014. Is that what I'm reading?
Okay, the thinking is, and maybe we need to just spend a minute on this, the thinking is that we would, once it goes through budget, or as soon as it's approved in budget, we would be building, or IT would be building the tool using the in-house web, or whatever, software, whatever. At the same time, the bylaw would be enacted, because we will have a draft bylaw at that point, it's well in advance of that. We will enact the bylaw for implementation, and you see the second last box on the right, for implementation, December 1st, 2014. That's with the new council. That gives us a little lead time to be prepared with training materials for elected officials to understand how this is going to work, and it'll be part of their orientation package.
Rose, go ahead.
Sorry, if I could, I think all it would affect is the box where we go from October 2013 to April 2014, that will be shortened.
Okay.
We'll get, in between, there will be a little fluid between coming back to this committee and then we go to GIC. As long as we get budget approval for April 2014, then we're on target.
Okay, David?
You do.
You do.
Yeah, my only concern is that, like, and I think we voiced this at the last council, is that or at the last committee meeting. This is done, this term of council, it's done.
Absolutely.
And we're just, you get into, again, council knows this better than I do, but you get into that election cycle and cold feet sort of come up. And no offense, but it's the reality. So I just want to ensure that we are in step to get this done for this term of council. Again, should it be approved through a budget and through other processes?
I would say done and implemented. That's what, is that?
Well, I'm satisfied with enacted for the actual next term of council.
Okay.
I'm satisfied with that personally.
Okay, Terry and then Dave.
Well, it's got the presumption on it, first of all, it has to get passed by GIC.
That's right.
I mean, all we're doing is recommendation, but.
That's right.
But the key piece that I'm concerned about is we're creating a whole new division and a bylaw and a process, and yet I don't see anywhere, and we talked about our mission statement being engagement. Can you help me understand where that is? Is that when they come in delegations at the GIC?
Dave Rose, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair, through you, we built in the piece to allow any delegations. In this scenario, it won't be September, but it will probably be November in 2013, somewhere around that time.
Well, I think it is important because it is a bylaw. I think we're required to do it anyway. But to ensure that that we advertise and ensure that people know that we take this seriously, we've been working on it. Here's the model that we're proposing, and then certainly hear what delegations have to say.
And I think that whole promotion process is important, so could we maybe spend a minute on this, just since Terry raised it?
We kind of got a bit built in there, about 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points down on the right-hand side, table recommendations to invite interested stakeholders and public with an opportunity to review, provide comment to GIC. So we see that as sort of a two-step process. The draft comes to this committee, the committee says, here's the final tweaks we want, and this will be the September meeting, and you will say, we want this, we don't want that, finalize it, and bring it to GIC in 2 weeks, whatever the schedule is. And it goes to GIC. GIC will look at it, because all of GIC needs to look at it, understand it. We would probably do a brief presentation. And then GIC would say, this is great,
Let's set a date when we're gonna hear from the public back on this and get some notice out there, push something out publicly that we're doing this, make sure we contacted people who may be interested, put something in the papers, on our site, and let's set a date for the next GIC or maybe 2 GICs in, so maybe mid-October. Let's hear from everybody who wants to speak on it, and that's the meeting when it gets. And that's the public process part of it. Okay, thank you. All right, David.
That's where I think we're going to be pushed back. There's a lot of people who are interested in that money, and they want to push back because that may impact on how they do business in the city. So I don't know how this is going to affect, because it's going to come back to GIC at least anyway. Members of council, they're going to hear about it from the people that it's going to impact on. So it's going to be, we may be pushing close to that 2014 timeline to get it finalized because of that pushback.
Right, but that pushback, regardless, it's important to hear
No
the
question.
delegations
No question.
from everybody,
Yeah, and that's where I'm
the
saying.
pros and the cons.
I'm hoping that we can get this all done for that 2014 timeline.
Right, but at the same time, hear all the delegations, because
Of course.
that's paramount to the whole process of.
That's what we're here for. Yeah.
Okay, no further business, I have no further speakers.
I don't think you have quorum, Judy.
Oh,
We've passed all, sorry, Badger, we've already passed the motions.
We've passed everything?
So you can adjourn without.
so we can adjourn without quorum, all right.
Well, you're actually staying adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, appreciate that. Clerk McLean.
3 missing? 3 missing?
4.
Who's 4?
Laura.
You have 8 on the committee.
Laura. Laura's.
Yeah, I was just.
All right, thanks for everybody, appreciate it. Good work. But it's more meat on the bones than I think we've ever had before, which is really important. So I am less frustrated than I was. And for you as well, because this is your second She stepped off for 2 months or something, didn't she?
Guys, I just asked for a resignation letter.
Oh.
Literally today, so.
Okay, well, that's what I thought.
Oh, so we were dealing with that today, but we'll need to receive it at council.
Yeah,
It's on council agenda.
no, but it's like you can make.
So we changed the quorum.
No.
I don't know. I think the last two years.
No, but I was telling you. And I was beginning to wonder if she'd don't work here. No, I mean, seriously, and I wondered if she'd take on a position either here or she was here. Yes. Yeah.
There seems to be an date.
And that is frustrating.
So, I'm eating things that
Elected, you have to be here. No, but that's too. And it's related to, so when they have, that participation.
they're actually
Here we are.
generates everything. And on the end, it's
Right, great.
switch that.
Yeah, I think.
So they have to.
Good to see you guys. Very good.
I just wanted to ask you what I'm finding. I wasn't sure what
Yeah.
Allow the cash flow to attend to.
Like it's not a.
Rose?
Yes.
There?
Yes.
Well, it sounded like they were basing it on that level.
Like I haven't been in the town. So I'm standing
No, I'm not.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. My friend,